Hey guys, what's up? So, can the cheapest LTD on the market compete with what is one of the most expensive LTDs on the market? Let's check that out. Hey guys, so about a month ago I looked at the Mick Thomson MT1 signature guitar from LTD. I got a lot of comments on that video about how pricey that guitar really is, and especially over in Europe and in Canada, it gets pretty expensive compared to the US. So I was like, well, what if, this cheapest model, the M201, has a very similar kind of thing going on aesthetically. How would that compare to something like the Mick Thomson MT1? And what are the deficiencies? And is there really like $1,000 worth of guitar difference between this and that? And what can I do to this guitar to kind of bring it up to get close to that? And if I can close the gap, are we really looking at something that's, that much of a disparity? So first up, let's just talk about this guitar in its stock form. It is a very bare bones, single pickup, bolt-on neck. I think that's one of the main critiques about it, bolt-on neck. But let's be fair, the Mirage shape from ESP from back in the day has always been kind of a bolt-on neck design from its outset. The other thing about this is, you got your nickel frets, you have a plastic nut, you have none of the bells and whistles that you get with most guitars that approach the $1,000 range. What you do get here for, I believe, $599 is what these retail for, is a decent finish, black matte finish, nothing crazy going on in terms of that. You do have pretty decent fretwork. I've played this for, a couple days now, and what I have found is there's no high frets, and the fret ends are actually pretty well done. Hardware's just okay. It's a little rough around the edges, but it works for what it is. Coil splittable generic pickup. Now, does that mean that it can't be brought up to a standard that's closer to what is the $1,600 LTD Mick Thomson or something comparable? We'll see. So here's my 5150 Iconic. I'm just going to play a clean channel, and then I'll jump over to the high gain. And yeah, here's how it sounds. Yeah, so nothing terrible going on there. I will say that the pickup sounds a little bit muted. I don't know how else to describe it. It's almost like you cannot squeeze enough top end to really get the clarity or the bite that you would get out of a better pickup. It is a very just flat and uninteresting. The response is a little bit thuddy. The other thing about this guitar, which is actually the worst thing about this guitar, is the tuners. These tuners are very, very bad. I don't know how else to say it. Yeah, the tuners need to be replaced. So I'm going to go modify this guitar, and then we're going to shoot it out against the Mick Thomson, which if you want to watch that video, I'll link it up here if I didn't already do that. And you can go see how this guitar sounds. But we'll see how this guitar fares against this guitar, and if we can kind of close the gap between these two guitars to see, how far off will you be having a guitar like this modified versus something like this out of the box that is already pretty much perfect in my opinion. So stay tuned for that. All right, guys, so I'm back, and I made a couple changes to this guitar, And to me, after making these changes, I don't know that I could say that a guitar in this price range, brand new $599, or you can find them used or even on discount for cheaper. A guitar like this as a mod platform where you just make a couple investments isn't almost as great feeling to play, and just kind of hangs with guitars that are much more expensive, like in the $1,000 plus range. Am I going to say it's as good as the MT1? No, but I think we're closing the gap quite substantially here, and let me show you what I did to this. So first up was the locking tuners that I installed here. They needed to happen. The stock tuners that came on this thing were pretty garbage. These are Tone Ninja locking tuners. They are not necessarily the most high-end, break the bank tuners. They are kind of mid-range. They sit in that like $50 to $80 range, but they are as good as any stock locking tuner you get on like an LTD or even, a Schecter. They just do the thing. They hold tune. They feel good. And I think they're definitely worth the investment, especially on a budget guitar like this. Additionally, I went with the Seymour Duncan Black Winter Rails pickup, the brand new drop from Seymour Duncan, and I'll link to all this stuff below. Okay, so here's just the Black Winter in full humbucker mode on the clean channel of this 5150 Iconic, and here's what it sounds like. Now you can obviously hear that right away we're dealing with a bit more output here. It's kind of hard to clean this pickup up through a tube amp like this, especially one that's meant to be kind of pretty filthily high gainy. I always found that the clean channels on the 5150s across the board just don't really clean up that much. So with a pickup like the Black Winter, with an output, around 17 kilo ohms, or, at least a resistance, you're gonna get a bit more saturation and a bit more just, a lot of signal. So, and if you go over to the split coil function, you'll just hear how much more top end clarity and punch this pickup has compared to the stock pickup. It's just meant for output and kind of that top end, just clank to it. Again, with the rails, I do feel like that mid-range is a bit more smoothed out. And if you go over to the high gain channel, we get to hear what this is really meant to do, which is the high gain. Yeah, with this pickup, it has so much grit and just presence up front. I don't even think you need to run any kind of boost pedal in front of it. It kind of sounds like it already has one on it. There's just this natural compression and somewhat of a harder push. Now, I imagine I could lower the pickup and kind of clean it up a little bit, but you'd kind of miss some of that that growly lower mids. If I do turn on something like a hex drive from Fortin here, you get the sense that it really doesn't need a boost pedal, but maybe it helps. Yeah, that aggression, that added aggression, isn't really necessary unless you just really want a really truncated bottom end. You could go to something like the King in Yellow from Licklarm Audio and get a little bit more of a modern tone. If you just really want to emphasize that upper mid-range and some of those top-end notes, I think with just the pickup by itself, it has a way better bite and clarity than the stock pickup for sure. Okay, so how does this compare to something like the MT1? You know, how much of a closing of the gap are we getting? Okay, so I'm over to the MT1, the Mick Thomson signature. I've widened out the camera so I can get a little bit more of this guitar into the picture. Now, without even playing it, I can already tell you where some of the discrepancy lies. We do have a 3-piece maple neck that is in the set-through construction design here. It's basically a set neck with a heel contour. It has a mahogany body, a solid mahogany body with a white ash cap on the body, even though you can't really see it because there's, you know, it has this metallic obsidian paint job. The construction on this guitar obviously features a much more high-end kind of wood. It just, you know, it is going to be a more expensive guitar. Now, I've seen plenty of guitars with these features that are more in the $1,000 price range. So why the extra $600? Are you just paying for a name? Well, let's look at some of the hardware features on here too. We have a solid brass hip shot high mass bridge. This thing has got a lot of heft to it. It's really heavy. It's really resonant. And the hip shot locking tuners already installed. Very high-end, very nice tuners. On top of that, we have the stainless steel medium jumbo frets. We have, obviously, a very aesthetically pleasing, you know, blank fretboard. We have lumen lace side dots to see in the dark. We have a Graphtec nut, and comparably, when you look at what's coming on that versus this, you kind of get it. But, you know, a few modifications to that guitar, and I'm having a hard time putting it down, and I'm really enjoying playing it. And does it really, you know, make a difference how that guitar feels to this guitar to play? I know the features and everything on here are much more high-end, but, you know, what about the playability? Also, the Mick Thomson signature Fishman pickup is a premium feature in and of itself, you know, featuring 4 different voicings for this particular configuration. You have voice 1 with a bass boost, you have voice 2, and then you have voice 3 single coil. Do I think it's better than the Black Winter's Rail? You know, I will say that the Mick Thomson voice 1 is my favorite Fishman voicing that's, you know, available for purchase. But let's hear what it sounds like and get a sense of how this plays after I just played that one. So, on a clean channel, sound-wise, I actually do kind of prefer the little bit of a top-end sparkle in the Black Winter, but I'll say that the texture and the overall dynamics of this active pickup, to me, actually seem a little bit better suited for my style of playing. It's not quite as responsive to the pick in terms of hard hits. Now, let's move on to the high gain, and we're on drop B, so it's going to sound a little bit more aggressive, maybe a little heavier than that Black Winter and Drop C. But I think for the purposes here, getting a feel for how these two things play against each other is really what's important. Okay, so two things are very apparent between these two guitars and how they play. That cheaper guitar is said to come with what they call an extra thin U neck profile, and this has only got the thin U profile. I'm going to call shenanigans a little bit on that because this neck feels a bit thinner and a bit faster than that neck. That neck feels a bit more like a thin C shape if I had to really call it out as anything. It definitely feels like it has more heft to it. Without calipers, I can't verify that, but just in the hand, this feels thinner. This also has a satinized finish on the back, so maybe that's contributing to that. The fret ends on this guitar, its action and how it actually feels to play in the hand, you definitely get the sense that this is a bit of a more high-end guitar than that one just by playing around on the neck for a few minutes. You get the sense that this has almost a custom shop feel to it. And as somebody who got a chance to play a $10,000 Will Adler ESP custom shop last week, and I'll put a picture of it up here, that guitar, immaculate, great. This guitar feels closer to that guitar than that cheap guitar feels to this guitar, if that makes sense. The other thing is the resonance and how the strings vibrate through the body on this guitar have a much deeper and very solid feel to it. Granted, that's not going to come through a speaker, a high gain thing. It's just not really going to translate to the listener, but to the player, it's very noticeable. However, do I think someone could definitely get more bang for their buck by going with the M201, doing a few modifications and making it a perfectly giggable guitar that is probably going to hold up in most situations? Certainly. I think the gap between the lower price and this higher price gets much smaller as soon as you start doing some pretty, what I would call pretty standard modifications to get you to where you need to be. And honestly, you might like the sound of the original pickup in that guitar, and all you'd have to do is really change out those tuning pegs because the bridge hardware is fine, the electronics are fine, the neck is great for what it is, and yeah, I think that guitar, when all is said and done, being around, like a $700 investment, is definitely in the competition with guitars that are in the $1,000 price range once you do some of that stuff. However, this guitar being in the $1,600 price range, to me it feels almost underpriced for what you get. And a lot of people are going to say, but look at the badge on the headstock. It says LTD, It doesn't say E2, it doesn't say ESP. Yeah, but I've played ESPs, I've played E2s. This thing is as close to those as you're going to get for under $2,000 anywhere. And let's not forget that other brands are starting to follow suit. Let's not forget that Epiphone has a $1,700 Firebird that is made in China and is $1,799 MSRP, brand new. So it doesn't seem like prices are necessarily trending downward at any time. I think they're trying to plateau as much as they can, and with a guitar like this, I think it's about right. But I think some of these cheaper guitars, these more budget-friendly guitars, they're under spec just enough to keep the prices where they are so people can actually obtain them. And then, you know, as you go, if you recognize that there's a discrepancy, like the tuning pegs on that one, you know, replacing them for, you know, $50 to $80, not too much of a uptick in investment there. If you decide that you definitely need a new pickup, there are so many options out there nowadays. I mean, Seymour Duncan has miraculously kept some of their prices very low in comparison to other competitors, like, you know, Fishman or Bare Knuckles that tend to be kind of on the higher end of price-wise. But there's some smaller boutique ones that are, if you want to, you know, if you want to support small business. I'm a Corrigan pickup artist. Check out Corrigan Pickups. They're from Canada. They're a small business enterprise. They're made by somebody by hand. And you're paying about the same that you would pay for any big name brand that's being made on a production line. So there's options out there. So the last piece of the puzzle here, in my opinion, is when you spend the extra money and you save up and you get the thing that you know should be flawless, you're buying that little bit of peace of mind that you went all out and you did the big thing versus, you know, going for the concession of getting the smaller thing and just knowing that you can add on to it and make it how you want. Me, personally, I like the idea of, you know, customizing my own guitars, but there's something to be said of a guitar that when you pull it out of the box is damn near perfect and doesn't need anything. I'm going to say in this battle, if you even want to call it that, the MT1 is going to give you the longevity and the peace of mind and the playability that is kind of unrivaled at its price point for what I, you know, have come across. However, don't be afraid to, if you just want something that you know is going to be reliable and that you have the prowess to do some of the modifications and you're invested in the idea that you're going to have to do some work, something like the M201, you know, these budget LTD models, perfectly fine and seemingly well done in most aspects. So take that for what you will. I'm going to keep jamming out on the MT1 here on this 5150. So see you guys later.